There's never any shortage of stories to include in a weekly episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. Usually, some get skipped because there's only so much I can fit and only so much I can stomach. But the one story that never seems to go away is the ongoing saga of the Epstein files. Every new document dump, every contradictory statement, every Truth Social meltdown makes a new headline and makes it harder to pretend that it's just old news. So here's the question that we're tackling this week. What happens when a scandal built on decades of secrets finally collides with a political figure who cannot keep a single story straight for more than 48 hours? Because as of this week, thanks to new emails, court-ordered releases, and a whole lot of panicked spin, we are watching that collision in real time. Welcome, one and all, to Your Neighbor on the Left, a podcast where we talk about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis. I am your host. And today, we're going to be talking about the freaking Epstein files. I know that most of you view this story with some mix of passion for transparency that we have not gotten yet, and a nauseous feeling sort of like the one you get after you check the milk that you already knew was spoiled. But today I want to try and bring everyone up to speed, because good Lord, there is just so much blather going on, it's awfully easy to get lost. So we're going to look at the whole sordid history as it relates to the contradictor-in-chief, and hopefully get everyone on the same page. But first, let's take a peek at some hot topics. Every so often, something happens that can only be described as feeling like a political magic trick. While everyone was staring at the drama of the government shutdown, a group of top Senate Republicans quietly slipped in a clause that could pay them $500,000 apiece, paid by taxpayers, if they chose to sue the federal government for having their phone records accessed during the January 6th investigation. This, of course, didn't happen in some boring reform bill about telecom policy. It was tucked into the legislative branch appropriations bill, the must-pass deal to reopen the government. Now, this is anything but transparency. It's self-preservation dressed up as a check on abuse. And the fact that it made it through shows how thoroughly the powerful in D.C. can manipulate the process in their own favor, especially when most people are focused on whether there's going to be furloughs or a debt ceiling drama. So here's the background. As part of Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into the lead up to the January 6th attack, the FBI obtained toll records, metadata about calls, for a number of Republican senators. These weren't wiretaps. According to the public reporting, the data showed who called whom and how long the calls were, but not what was said. The investigation was controversial. Republican lawmakers have long portrayed it as politically motivated overreach, a weaponization of the Justice Department by the Biden administration. So when Senate Majority Leader John Thune negotiated the shutdown-ending package, he pushed hard for a new carve-out, a way for any senator whose data was accessed without what this bill calls proper notice to sue the government. The provision requires telecom providers to alert Senate offices and the Senate Sergeant-at-Arms if the feds ask for data unless there's a criminal investigation ongoing, in which case the notice can be delayed. If notification is improper or absent, the senator can file a civil action, and the law explicitly waives some of the immunity protections the government usually relies on in such investigations. And here's where it gets even more eyebrow-raising. The statute allows $500,000 per violation. That's not a symbolic gesture, that's serious money. For each unauthorized data request or failure to notify, bang, $500,000. Plus legal fees, plus court costs, yada yada yada. Also, they made it retroactive. The law applies to violations going back to January 1st, 2022. That timing is not accidental. It covers the window during which that 2023 subpoenaing happened. Now, who are the people who could benefit? According to public reporting, the list includes 8 Republican senators: Lindsey Graham, Marsha Blackburn, Bill Hagerty, Josh Hawley, Dan Sullivan, Tommy Tuberville, Ron Johnson, and Cynthia Lummis. Also mentioned in older reports, a House member, Representative Mike Kelly, whose colleagues reportedly were part of the same subpoena, but, and this matters, House members are not eligible under this provision. So you'll have a number of GOP senators saying more or less, yes, the government invaded my privacy, now pay me. But here's the twist. Despite all the outrage, not all of them are actually rushing to file suit. Several have publicly said they won't pursue payout. Dan Sullivan, for example, reportedly found out about the whole clause only when he was reading the bill. That kind of undercuts the self-defense rhetoric somewhat if you're not even sure you want the defense money. Critics on both sides of the aisle have called this self-dealing. Democrats argue it's a taxpayer-funded windfall, a reward for complaining about being under investigation, and that's not a subtle critique. Senator Pat Murray called it a corrupt cash bonus of at least $500,000 for each of 8 GOP senators. The House Republicans are even pushing to repeal the provision now that the shutdown is over. It's rare to see this kind of internal blowback when your own party leadership tucked in something so clearly for themselves, even other Republicans are calling foul. Now, let's pause and think about what this means. In one of the most power-charged moments in recent U.S. history, the January 6th investigation, some of the very people who were allegedly in contact with Trump or involved in other controversy are writing their own insurance policy. They're not just criticizing the DOJ for, quote, spying on them. They're creating a legal right to be paid if they can prove that their phone records were part of the attachment. That raises all sorts of ethical and constitutional questions. First of all, why should members of Congress get a special bailout for being under investigation? Normally, when someone sues the government, there's a lot of legal risk and the government has immunities. But this provision waives some of that, effectively giving senators a very strong tool to push back. It's almost like lawmakers are saying, if you investigate me, I reserve the right to make you pay a lot. Second, what precedent does this set? If one party gets a carve-out like this, what's to stop future Congresses from writing more protections for themselves whenever there's a politically sensitive investigation? What message does that send about accountability in government? If you are powerful enough to get subpoenaed, you might be powerful enough to codify your own shield against the consequences of that subpoena. Third, who pays? Because these lawsuits, if filed and successful, will be backed by taxpayer dollars. This isn't some private fund. The American public is writing the check for these claims, whether or not those claims are purely rhetorical or intended to expose legitimate overreach. And why was this provision slipped in now under the radar? The timing is very telling. The shutdown deal had to pass. A lot of eyes were on spending fights about agencies, pay for furloughed workers, headline crisis stuff. Meanwhile, somewhere in committee rooms or backroom negotiations, this insurance policy is quietly inserted. It's not a stretch to say this is classic political backroom power playing. When you control a must-pass funding bill, you can insert a self-serving clause with minimal debate. What's perhaps most outrageous and revealing about how broken our system is right now is how resilient this behavior is. We've already seen countless underhanded maneuvers, repeated norms violations, and brazen self-enrichment by powerful Republicans, and yet their political base doesn't seem to ever hit a ceiling of outrage. Accusations of corruption or self-dealing that would have destroyed a less powerful politician in the past seem to roll off these lawmakers like water off a duck's back. Part of that is the messaging. They frame this not as a payout, but as a defense of their constitutional role, their privilege, their right to be protected from overreach. That narrative works for their base. They're protecting themselves from a weaponized DOJ. But protect themselves from what? Exactly. From an investigation that was, while controversial, totally lawful, according to the special counsel's office? That's detention. And yet here we are, a major political party quietly carving out a financial path for its members in case of scrutiny. That should make everyone, not just the outraged or the cynical, deeply uneasy. Now you might hear some say, well, if they were subpoenaed, they deserved a right to sue. Fine. Accountability is good in general. But why 500,000? And why retroactively? Why create a special law just for lawmakers? Why not fix broader legal protections for all Americans, or at least for all public servants, not just a handful who are under investigation themselves? It also, feels like a way to do two things at once. Score political points, the DOJ tried to spy on us, and financially protect themselves at the same time. Whether or not they all follow through with lawsuits, the very existence of the clause changes the power dynamics. It could intimidate future investigative efforts or embolden more aggressive pushbacks. It's not just about what happens right now. It's about setting a precedent. Now, in the fallout, some of these senators are stepping back, not necessarily because they seem to think the principle is bad, but because the optics are so bad and the political backlash is real. House members, even within the GOP, are pushing to remove it, and Democrats are seizing on it as an example of why trust in institutions is eroding. Because when power is concentrated, the powerful often write their own protections into the very laws that they pass. So, what should you take away from all this? First, don't be fooled by the narrative spin. This was not just a defense of Senate privilege. It was a calculated political play that could personally enrich certain senators. Second, this matters not just for this moment. It's part of a bigger pattern of how power works in Washington right now. And third, if we care about accountability and fairness, we should care deeply about who gets to write the rules and for whose benefit. At the end of the day, the real story here isn't just that some senators might sue the government. It's that those same senators were able, during a crisis, under pressure while the government was shut down, to slip themselves a safety net worth potentially $500,000 each. That's not just self-protection, that's privilege masquerading as principle. We may not stop every piece of that, but we should absolutely call it out, loudly, clearly, and without letting anyone gaslight us into thinking this is just routine legislative housekeeping. Because when lawmakers write their own safety net, ordinary people don't get parachutes. We just get the bill. Okay, now let's all take a deep breath before I begin this segment, because what I'm about to say is uncomfortable on a spiritual level. I agree with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Not broadly, not philosophically, not in any way that would require me to say, respect her judgment. But at this exact moment, on this exact issue, the widening gulf between MTG and Donald Trump, we appear to be standing in the same general zip code. And I'd like everyone to appreciate how much personal work it takes for me to admit such a thing. It feels like finding out the only open seat in the restaurant is next to the guy who never stops talking about cryptocurrency. You'll sit there if you have to, but you're not happy about it. Yet here we are. And here is this political soap opera. No, this telenovela unfolding between Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Two people who once seemed inseparable. Not in a romantic way, obviously. More in the way that the Joker and Harley Quinn are inseparable. Bonded by the chaos they generate together and the complete disregard for the well-being of anyone within a 3-block radius. For years, MTG wasn't just a loyalist. She was the patron saint of loyalty. She was Trump's most vocal defender, champion, warrior, hype woman, and conspiracy sous chef. If Trump said the sky was green, she'd be on cable news explaining that actually the sky has been green all this time, and anyone who says otherwise is part of the deep state. But at some point, and this is the political equivalent of when the power goes out in a haunted house, she realized something. Trump wasn't rewarding her devotion. Not with status, not with influence, not a guaranteed running mate slot, not even with the occasional nod of gratitude. She had invested everything. Trump had invested nothing. And eventually, the bill came due. This rift isn't about policy. It's about proximity to power. You will search the history of this schism for ideological differences and find absolutely none. MTG didn't diverge because she discovered a secret progressive streak. She didn't suffer some crisis of conscience. There was no road to Damascus, unless Damascus now has a golden corral off the highway where you can stop and reconsider your life choices. This isn't about principles. This is about placement. Your standing in Trump world is determined by two things: how loudly you defend him, and how useful he finds you at any given moment. And usefulness, in Trump's eyes, has the shelf life of room temperature sushi. Greene had convinced herself she was indispensable, untouchable, a permanent fixture in the MAGA constellation. But Donald Trump does not have fixtures. He has furniture. Movable, replaceable, rearrangeable furniture. And when her usefulness waned, he simply moved her to the corner of the room, and she did not take it very well. The thing about MTG is that she's used to being the disruptor, not the disrupted. She's used to attacking, not being attacked. She's used to taking the crown, not watching the king ignore her from atop it. So she started lashing out at Republicans she thought were challenging her status. Then Republicans she thought weren't loyal enough. Then Republicans who were too loyal because that made her look less loyal by comparison. It was chaos, even by Republican standards. And eventually, the chaos splattered onto Trump himself. Trump doesn't do complicated motivations. He doesn't do introspection. His political worldview can be summed up in one sentence. Are you helping me, or are you hurting me? When Green's behavior crossed that line from helping to hurting, Trump finally acted. Not with a phone call, not with a private warning, but with the time-tested Trumpian method of discipline, public humiliation. MTG is disagreeing with Trump on a number of different issues. The most prominent being the Epstein files. She wants him to release them, as do most of us. But also, she has major disagreements as far as foreign aid goes and how that factors into the whole America First vibe that she wholeheartedly believes and he pretends to wholeheartedly believe. And she's made public statements to that effect. So he resorts to posts, rants, offhand insults designed to land like precision missiles. Trump made it abundantly clear that Green was no longer in the inner circle, and she was not getting back in. Now, that in and of itself is mostly nonsense, because if she turns around next week and starts kissing his orange butt, she'll be right back in. But she doesn't seem to be in the mood to do any of that right now. Which brings us to my personal dilemma, finding myself momentarily aligned with Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's like going to the dentist and finding out that your cavity is smaller than you expected. Yes, that's technically good news, but you're still in the chair and someone's still holding a drill. But her critique that the movement is fracturing, that loyalty is being abused, that Trump is turning on his own, all of that is true. Not because she has suddenly discovered honesty, but because she feels the consequences of the system she's helped build. For years, she enforced purity tests. Now she's failing one. For years, she accused others of disloyalty. Now she's being labeled a traitor. For years, she supported a man who punishes weakness. Now she's showing weakness. It's almost Shakespearean if Shakespeare had written exclusively about Facebook comment sections come to life. For people outside the MAGA fold, for people like you and me, this rift is revealing. Not because we're suddenly going to trust Green, not because she's some whistleblower, and not because she's bravely calling out authoritarianism. She's not. It's revealing because it exposes the inherent instability of a political movement built entirely around one man's ego. When a movement has no ideological foundation, no institutional guardrails, no governing philosophy, and no internal accountability, it becomes a snake eating itself. The most loyal devour the less loyal. The less loyal devour the slightly disloyal. And eventually, no one trusts anyone except the man at the top. And that man demands absolute loyalty, but gives none. The MAGA Civil War isn't just MTG versus Trump. This rift isn't insulated. It's part of a broader pattern. You can see it happening with former insiders like Steve Bannon, former allies like Mark Meadows, Senate candidates Trump turned on, governors who dared express independence, congressional members who weren't sufficiently sycophantic. Trump doesn't tolerate anyone who grows too big, too visible, or too comfortable in the limelight he reserves solely for himself. MTG was always going to hit that wall. The only real question was when. If this were just a petty beef between two political personalities, it wouldn't be worth 15 or 20 minutes of my time or yours. But it's more than that. It's a window into the decay of a movement that once seemed monolithic. Here's what the Trump MTG riff really tells us. Number one, the MAGA coalition is no longer unified. The internal fractures are widening, and they're widening publicly. Number two, loyalty is no longer enough. People who once enjoyed absolute protection are discovering that the protection was always conditional. Number three, the movement lacks a second generation. There's no obvious successor, no ideology to carry forward, no institutional structure. It's just a brand tied to one man. Number four, the far right is beginning to eat itself. Extremist movements always do this. History is full of examples. They implode from within long before external opposition takes them down. And finally, number five, Trumpism is losing its gravitational pull. MTG's rebellion doesn't mean she's right, but it does mean she no longer believes Trump's endorsement is politically necessary. That's a shift. A subtle one, but a significant one. The great irony, the part that makes this almost funny if it weren't also dangerous, is that Green is now describing Trump the same way many of us have described him for years. And the moment she starts saying these things, suddenly the GOP establishment is listening. Not because they believe her, but because she's one of them. She's not a liberal. She's not a Democrat. She's not a never-Trumper. She's not, the quote-unquote coastal elite with a subscription to the Atlantic. She's one of the loudest, angriest, most unapologetically extreme members of the right. And even she is starting to sound the alarm. And that should tell you something important. This isn't a left versus right issue anymore. It's a stability versus chaos issue. It's a competence versus cult issue. And even people inside the cult are realizing they're not safe. So yes, temporarily, briefly, and with the full expectation that I will regret this the minute she opens her mouth again, I find myself agreeing with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Not because she's right, but because she's describing something real. The Trump MTG split is not politics as usual. It's a symptom of a movement in decline. A movement that can no longer control its own extremists. A movement that's starting to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. And if the people who built this thing, the very architects of the chaos, are now sounding nervous, well, that means something. And frankly, I'll take that glimmer of instability any day. Even if it means agreeing with MTG for 5 deeply uncomfortable minutes. Now, this is not the first time I've spoken about tariffs, and I'm sure it will not be the last time I will speak about them. But let's start with the simple truth that the Trump administration has spent months, if not years, insisting is a lie. Americans pay for tariffs. You pay, I pay. The family picking up groceries on a Thursday night pays. The small business owner ordering inventory pays. Anyone who buys anything, imported, which these days is practically everything, pays. But for years, Trump has been telling his supporters that China pays tariffs. He didn't just say it once in an offhand way. It's almost become a mantra, a slogan, a talking point, a belief system, if he actually had a belief system. He said it so often that many of his supporters believe it with the same level of confidence that they believe the sun rises in the east. China pays, China pays, China pays. Except, and I cannot emphasize this enough, China does not pay. Tariffs are taxes, taxes on imports, taxes that get passed directly to the American businesses and consumers. Economists have explained this over and over and over. Trade experts have explained this. Retailers have explained this. Even a handful of Republican senators on their braver days have explained this. And now, inadvertently, accidentally, and with the subtlety of a raccoon trying to sneak into a metal trash can at 3 a.m., Donald Trump himself has finally admitted it. Not with words, of course. Oh, no. He would never do that. With actions. Because over the past week, Trump has quietly reversed some of his tariffs. Not the big ones that get attention, not the ones that would, require a press conference or a rally speech. No. These are the smaller, highly targeted tariff cuts buried in policy announcements and administrative adjustments that I'm talking about. Coffee, certain electronics, select consumer goods, items that directly affect what Americans buy every day. And here's the important part. They're being cut to reduce prices. Why would you cut tariffs if you've spent years telling people tariffs don't raise prices? Why would you reverse your own policy if you spent months saying inflation isn't real and everything is cheaper under your leadership? Why would you make a move to lower costs if you spent every rally shouting about how grocery prices are down, despite every single grocery shopper in America shaking their head at the checkout line like, are you kidding me? This is why the tariff reversal matters. Not because coffee will suddenly become a bargain bin impulse buy, though that would be nice, considering caffeine is the only thing that keeps half of us functioning. It matters because it exposes the lie. For years, Trump has built an economic narrative around three core ideas. Number one, tariffs punish foreign countries. Number two, tariffs don't raise prices on Americans. And number three, any inflation you think you're seeing is either imaginary or Joe Biden's fault. This narrative wasn't based on economics or reality or data or even basic math, for that matter. It was based on vibes, on crowd energy, on repetition, on the political trick that says if you shout something confidently enough over and over again, people will start to believe it. And in politics, the people often number in the millions. Tariffs became the Swiss Army knife of Trump's trade policy. He used them as bargaining chips, as weapons, as applause lines, as proof that he was getting tough. They were the centerpiece of his America First framing, even though the economic data showed they harmed American manufacturers, American farmers, American consumers, and American businesses. But now the administration is quietly rolling them back. Not because China changed, or any other country for that matter. Not because global supply chains have magically stabilized. Not because economists changed their minds. They're being rolled back for one reason. Prices are too high, and the White House knows Americans are feeling it. And they know voters will blame the person in charge. The subtle admission isn't really actually subtle. Politicians don't reverse themselves on policy unless they have to. Especially this politician. Trump is not known for subtlety or humility or restraint. He doesn't walk things back. He never admits mistakes. He doesn't back down from positions even when gravity is pulling him off the cliff. So when he reverses tariffs, you should pay attention. Because reversing tariffs is basically saying prices are too high, and this thing we said didn't affect prices is in fact affecting prices. It's the economic version of saying we have always been at war with East Asia, except suddenly East Asia is your main trading partner again. The White House may not say the quiet part out loud, but the policy says it for them. Tariffs made consumer prices significantly higher. Rolling them back will make prices go down. It's not subtle, it's not hidden, it's right there, baked into the policy change. And what makes this even wilder is the timing. Because, as I'm sure you know, Trump has spent the last several weeks insisting that inflation is fake, that prices are down, that everything costs less under his leadership, that he alone fixed the economy. He says this despite the fact that grocery prices remain high, rent remains high, utilities remain high. My electric bill is the highest it's ever been consistently. Car prices remain high, and every single American with a pulse and a wallet knows prices are not lower than ever. There is not a single voter, MAGA, liberal, independent, floating in the void, whatever, who has walked into a grocery store lately and thought, wow, everything is so cheap now. Thank you, Donald. So he had two options. Admit inflation exists, admit the prices are high, and admit his policies have contributed to that, or pretend none of it was real, quietly adjusting the policy behind the scenes to fix it. Guess which one he picked? Guess which one he always picks? Here's the clever part. Clever in the way that putting an out-of-order sign over a broken vending machine is clever. The tariff rollbacks were done under the radar because the administration knows his base cannot handle the cognitive dissonance. They've been told for years that tariffs cost them nothing. They've been told that inflation is a myth. They've been told that only liberals believe prices are rising. You cannot go to those same supporters and say, well, actually, we're reversing tariffs to lower prices. That's like telling someone who has spent their entire life insisting the earth is flat to please step over this round horizon. So, they're doing it quietly. No press conference, no rally announcement, no victory lap. Because if you admit tariffs raised prices, then you're also admitting that Trump raised consumer costs. Trump worsened inflation. Trump made imports more expensive. Trump hurt American businesses. Trump's trade policies are failing. Biden didn't cause all of the inflation. And the economy is not magically perfect under Trump 2.0. That's a political earthquake. So instead of saying any of that, they quietly reduce tariffs on some select items and hope no one notices. But we noticed because we live in reality. The thing about reality is that it tends to show up whether you invite it or not. You can ignore the economists, you can dismiss the trade analysis, you can shout fake news at every graph, but you cannot hide the price of coffee. Not metaphorically, literally. People notice when coffee costs more. They notice when electronics cost more. They notice when grocery trips are suddenly $25 to $50 higher than the same time last year. They notice when everything is expensive except wages. And so the White House is doing exactly what you do when reality contradicts your talking points. You quietly adjust policy and pray no one connects the dots. But here we are, connecting them. Now, what this means politically? Well, this whole situation, this quiet tariff reversal while loudly insisting everything is great, tells us something important about the political environment right now. The administration is governing based on polls, not policy. They see voters complaining about prices, so they do something about prices. Not because they believe in the policy, not because they understand the economics, but because voters are angry. It's reactive governance, not proactive governance. It's patchwork economics. Fix one leak while ignoring the fact that the roof is collapsing. It reveals a deep insecurity about the midterm elections. You don't reverse your signature trade policy unless you're worried about losing voters. And it exposes the hollowness of the rhetoric. If tariffs never raise prices, lowering them wouldn't lower prices. But here we are. So let's talk about the big lie, the inflation lie. Trump keeps saying inflation is fake, overhyped, gone, down 25%, lower than under Biden. I mean, there's a whole flurry of platitudes that he uses, none of which are remotely true. Inflation has cooled, yes, but prices are not down. Cooling inflation means prices are rising more slowly, not that they're declining. Your grocery bill does not get smaller just because the rate of increase is slowing. Trump knows this, or should know this. His advisors know this. The people writing the tariff policy definitely know this. But politically, he cannot admit it. So he does the next best thing. He quietly undermines his own argument. So if the administration truly believed tariffs didn't raise prices, they wouldn't lift them. If they truly believed inflation was fake, they wouldn't try to lower prices. If they truly believed Americans were spending less for more, they wouldn't be scrambling to fix specific consumer goods. Economic policy reveals truth. Rhetoric reveals narrative. And when policy contradicts narrative, it's the policy that tells you what's actually going on. So, what comes next? I wouldn't be surprised if you see more quiet rollbacks. Expect some more small reversals, even, more subtle adjustments meant to lower costs without openly admitting the cause. What you might hear is the White House blame China or blame retailers or blame globalists. They'll certainly blame Biden. Blame anyone who, is anyone except the people actually responsible. Meanwhile, the policy team will keep trying to pry down costs because they know voters can feel the squeeze. This tariff reversal, this quiet under the table, please don't notice this gesture, isn't just a policy shift. It's an admission, a reluctant whispered admission that the economic reality Trump has been denying all year is in fact real. Prices are high, tariffs made them higher, Americans are paying the cost, and now the administration is trying to undo the damage without admitting that there is any damage. It's the economic equivalent of pushing a broken vase under the couch and hoping your parents never look there. But here's the good news. When politicians try to gaslight an entire country about prices, reality always wins. You can lie about charts, you can lie about graphs, you can lie about inflation, you can lie about tariffs, but you cannot lie about the checkout total. You cannot lie about the receipt. Americans feel it. They know it. And now, even if he'll never say it out loud, Donald Trump knows it too. All right, so let's get to it. Let's dive into the increasingly chaotic, increasingly contradictory, and increasingly unavoidable saga of Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein, and the files that just won't stop producing bad days for Mar-a-Lago's most famous golfer. I want this episode to be part explainer, part timeline, part what the hell is going on, and part can everyone please stop lying to our faces. You don't have to be a political junkie to follow this. My job today, as I've chosen it for myself, is to break the entire thing down into a coherent narrative you can listen to while cooking dinner, driving to work, or hiding from your conservative uncle. So let's start with the basics. This story is complicated, but it shouldn't be confusing unless someone is trying to confuse you. And right now, a whole lot of people are trying very, very hard to do exactly that. So let's start off with where this all starts. The many versions of Trump and Epstein. Let's begin with what we know. And we're going to go chronologically because the timeline is crucial. One of the defining features of the Trump-Epstein storyline is that Trump's versions of events changes depending on what year he's talking about and how threatened he feels. So, back in the 80s and 90s, Trump and Epstein weren't just acquaintances, they were pals, social friends, Palm Beach neighbors with overlapping social circles. These two guys ran in the same money and models crowd. Trump flew on Epstein's jet several times between 93 and 97, sometimes with family. They were photographed together at parties. They visited each other's homes. This is not speculation. This is excessively documented. And then there's the infamous 2002 New York Magazine quote where Trump called Epstein a terrific guy and said that he liked women on the younger side. That sentence did not age like wine. It aged like milk. What makes all this important isn't just the friendship, it's how sharply it contradicts everything Trump says today. Now, at some point in the mid-2000s, Trump decided this relationship needed a rewrite. Sometimes he says the friendship ended around 2000. Sometimes he says it was 2002. Sometimes he says it was 2004. On Tuesdays, it's one thing. On Thursdays, it's another. His favorite version of the story is that he threw Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago for misbehavior. Sometimes he claims Epstein harassed a teenage girl. Sometimes he says Epstein was trying to poach one of his employees. Now, there are just a couple of problems. Membership records show Epstein remained active past Trump's claimed date of expulsion. Photos and logs show they still interacted after Trump says they stopped. A now authenticated birthday card from Trump to Epstein turned up, complete with the crude sketches and references to girls. Trump denied writing it, of course. He denies handwriting is even handwriting unless it's flattering. So we have version 1, Epstein was great. Then version 2, Epstein was terrible and Trump smote him from Mar-a-Lago like Zeus. Neither version is consistent with the evidence. Now, fast forward to Epstein's arrest in 2019. Trump suddenly becomes the world's greatest Epstein skeptic. He says, "I haven't spoken to him in 15 years. I was never a fan. I banned him from Mar-a-Lago." This is what happens when the FBI shows up and your old buddy is accused of running a criminal trafficking ring. Everybody becomes a world-class gymnast, flipping away from him as fast as humanly possible. But then Epstein gets recorded privately, claiming Trump was one of his closest friends for a decade, that they socialized constantly, that Trump knew about the girls, and that Trump asked Maxwell to knock it off. We don't know if Epstein lied on those tapes. Epstein lied plenty in his life, but Trump's denials don't match the documented timeline either. That's the theme you're going to hear again and again. Conflicting stories aren't proof of guilt, but they're definitely proof of fear. Now, let's talk about the present, because this year, 2025, the dam finally seems to be bursting. House Democrats released more than 50,000 pages of Epstein-related files in phases. Some of it's mundane, some of it's utterly horrifying, and some of it's extremely awkward for Donald J. Trump. Not incriminating, not smoking gun criminal, but embarrassing, contradictory, and very, very inconvenient. So, the emails that dropped this past week, this latest batch, the one making the headlines right now, includes over 1,000 references to Trump by name, Epstein saying damaging info on Trump could, quote, take him down. Epstein describing Trump as dumb and gross. Epstein complaining that Trump spent hours at his home with a victim present. And the piece de resistance, the infamous Bubba email, which seems to be gnawing at Trump's ego like a raccoon trapped in a pantry. Now, I'm not going to go into the details on the Bubba email. I'll let you guys look that up for yourselves. Because if I skip that particular part of the story, I can keep from having to mark this episode as explicit when I post it. Now, anyway, there's no criminal allegation in these emails specifically, let's be crystal clear, but they do paint a picture of Trump's relationship with Epstein that is a whole lot closer than anything his usual talking points would suggest. And here's where the psychology gets interesting. Trump can handle criminal accusations. He does it every day. What he cannot handle, what he has never been able to handle, is mockery, humiliation, or someone calling him dumb. If you've been watching the response from Mar-a-Lago over the past 72 hours, it has big, someone just insulted his manhood energy. Behind the scenes, absolutely seething. The walls in that place must be begging for mercy. So now, let's talk about the House GOP obstruction machine. Of course, you may be wondering, why aren't these files all out already? Why are they still dribbling out in phases? Why does every release seem like pulling teeth with pliers bought at a Home Depot? Well, let me introduce you to the 2025 House Republican strategy. Protect Trump at all costs, even if it means lying, delaying, and contradicting their own previous statements. That's pretty much it in the nutshell. Remember how in February, Trump's Attorney General Pam Bondi went on television and said that the files were sitting on her desk and ready to go. Remember how she promised swift declassification. Remember how Trump said releasing these files was a top priority. Fast forward a few months, and suddenly, the same Pam Bondi says there is no client list. There are victim privacy concerns preventing release. The Democrats are weaponizing the files. The media is lying about the content. The files are not what people think, and simultaneously too explosive to release. It's like watching someone fail a polygraph before the machine gets plugged in. And when the Democrats move to release documents through the courts, Republicans fight it. They delay it. They claim it's political. They claim it will mislead the public. Translation, they know these files embarrass Trump, and embarrassment is politically fatal to him. Crime accusations? Who knows? Hypocrisy? Standard. But looking like a fool? Absolutely, positively unacceptable. So, the question always gets bandied about, why didn't Biden release the files? This one drives me crazy because it's so painfully obvious that it's amazing that it's still even used as a talking point. So the Republicans keep shouting, why didn't Biden release the files? He had access to them for his entire presidency. What was he hiding? And the answer is this, and it's not complicated. Ghislaine Maxwell's legal process was still active. Appeals were ongoing. Victims were still testifying in related cases. Releasing the files prematurely could have compromised prosecutions and, at that point, re-traumatized victims. It's not a conspiracy. It is the standard handling of sensitive evidence during active litigation. But the GOP discovered that yelling, Biden, gets clicks. So, here we are. Now, let's talk about a little bit more about the whole Bondi versus Bondi thing. Because earlier this year, she said it very plainly. There is no Epstein client list. That's a myth. Okay, clear enough. But fast forward to now, and Trump has ordered her to investigate Democrat ties to the client list. So either the list exists and she lied back then, or the list still doesn't exist and she's about to fabricate Democratic connections, faster than AI makes a picture of Bigfoot. There is no third option. Either way, Republicans are gearing up to weaponize whatever emerges, even if it's contradictory, meaningless, or, outright imaginary. And here's where I stand, and where lots of, commentators that I am familiar with stand. Anyone on the list should be investigated. Democrats, Republicans, billionaires, celebrities, random Joes. It does not matter. This is not about protecting political parties. It's about protecting actual victims. Which, of course, brings us to something a bit darker. This week, Megyn Kelly made comments suggesting Epstein's crimes are being exaggerated because the victims were teenagers, not children. Now, I can't emphasize enough how shocked I was at such a thing. And for many, many reasons. The least of which was the fact that in the past, Trump has treated Megyn Kelly like an absolute doormat. And the idea that she's willing to pander to him at this point for ratings on whatever it is that she's doing, wherever she's doing it, it still absolutely just mystifies me. But as I said, that's the least. That's the least of the problems with this. Just let me be extremely clear. If a 15-year-old is groomed, trafficked, abused, exploited, raped, that is a child in my mind. This is not ambiguous. The law is not ambiguous. Morality, in this case, is not ambiguous. But now we're seeing a wave of commentators, mostly in MAGA circles, trying to make efforts to soften Epstein's crimes because acknowledging them fully makes the political fallout for Trump more severe. You see language like, well, they weren't little kids. It wasn't pedophilia technically. Some were older teens, barely illegal. That one I love. Barely illegal. And it's not what people think. I actually watched an episode, a clip from an episode of a progressive podcast where a caller demanded that the host explain why what Jeffrey Epstein did was illegal. It defies explanation. But all this is how normalization begins. This is how abuse gets framed as something less monstrous. And it's nothing short of disgusting. The goal is not accuracy. The goal is minimizing outrage so that Trump's proximity to Epstein looks a little bit less toxic. How anyone can allow that is beyond me. Now, this story keeps getting more complicated. We're in this weird moment where new files contradict old statements, new statements contradict last week's statements, Republicans contradict themselves, Pam Bondi contradicts Pam Bondi, and Trump contradicts literally everyone, including himself. Every new release pulls us deeper into this maze of shifting narratives and political panic. What makes it complicated isn't the facts. The facts are pretty straightforward. What makes it complicated is the massive amount of energy being spent twisting those facts into something more politically convenient, and horribly, as of late, trying to twist them into something more palatable. This is why we have to keep talking about it. Not because Trump is guilty of Epstein's crimes. So far, there's no evidence of that. But because the truth matters, victims matter, the public deserves accuracy, not propaganda. where do we go from here? We're not at the end of the story, of course, not even close. There are several things still coming. More document releases, pending court rulings, subpoenas to Bondi, fights over redactions, public pressure from media outlets, the looming question of whether Republicans will try to bury Phase 3 altogether, and hovering over all of this is the political question: how much inconsistency, how much defensiveness, how much contradictory explanations can one man give before even his supporters start to wonder what's being hidden? History says they'll follow him into a volcano if he asks. But, one can hope that even these folks have limits. As I said when I started here, I intended to offer nothing in this segment that proves guilt. It's not about implying crimes that are yet to be in the record. It wasn't about assigning blame where it doesn't belong. It's about clarity, about sorting through decades of shifting narratives, about separating evidence from spin, about recognizing when political leaders are insulting your intelligence, and about refusing to let anyone minimize crimes against children. Yes, children, to score points in a partisan grudge match. We can demand transparency. We can demand accountability. And we can do it consistently, without fear or favor, whether the names involved have an R or a D or whatever next to them. This story will keep developing. And I'm sure this won't be the last time that I will talk about it. But it's the last time I'm going to talk about it this week. Okay, and that brings us to this week's high note. It's been another one of those weeks. We have a lot of those weeks lately when you're following the kind of subjects we follow on Your Neighbor on the Left. But, there's the lies, the noise, the political gamesmanship, and it all feels held together with duct tape. And I like to end on something a little different. Something that reminds us that we're more than the mess we scroll through. Something that reminds us that the country is still full of some decent people doing decent things. So let's talk about World Kindness Day, which landed this year on November 13th, a Thursday. Right in the middle of the week, right when most of us are tired, overstimulated, and possibly wondering if it's socially acceptable to just crawl under our desk and take a nap. And yet somehow, this year, people still showed up. World Kindness Day isn't tied to any religion or any political group or any big sponsor, for that matter. It started back in 1998, just a little global idea born out of a meeting in Tokyo. Something meant to push back against cynicism of public life. Kindness as a social force. That was the mission. And honestly, in 2025, we could use a social force or two. This year's theme, unofficially, was Connect Beyond Differences. And that hit differently. Because if there's anything we're starved for, anything we're aching for, it's connection that isn't about fighting or proving somebody wrong online. It's connecting without prerequisites. And somehow this year, that theme caught fire. Social media, which, let's be honest, is usually where empathy goes to die, suddenly became a kindness megaphone, at least in certain corners. The hashtag World Kindness Day crossed 100,000 posts in a day. Not influencers, not politicians, just average people telling stories that felt like opening a window in a stuffy room. There was a Memphis teacher whose thread went viral. She set up a kindness wall in her classroom. Just a cheap corkboard with sticky notes. gratitudes, compliments, encouragement. Kids started posting so many notes that other classes joined in. Then the school joined in. And at some point, it snowballed into a giant hug chain in the hallway. It sounds cheesy, but the thing is, bullying reports dropped by 20% that week. Turns out kids respond to kindness when adults model it. Even Elmo chimed in, because of course he did. A simple kindness makes Elmo smile, and the replies were thousands of parents showing their kids doing small good deeds. One mom posted a photo of her 5-year-old helping carry groceries to a neighbor's porch and said it was the first time her son felt big. That's the stuff that sticks. Even Krispy Kreme ran a promo. Buy a dozen donuts, get another free to share. And listen, if the path to peace is paved with glazed donuts, I'm not arguing. But the best stories weren't even online. They were out in the world. In New York, public libraries hosted these small gatherings called kindness circles. Strangers sitting together, sharing stories of moments when someone showed up for them. A guy talked about a bus driver who refused to leave him alone at a stop after midnight. A woman shared how her neighbor shoveled her steps every winter without ever asking for anything. 500 people showed up to these circles across the city. 500 people choosing connection over isolation. And by the end, those same circles launched a book drive that gathered over 2,000 books for kids who need them. In California, a single anonymous donor, one person, dropped $100 at a local coffee shop in Fairfield. Just pay it forward, they said. That $100 transformed into more than 150 acts of kindness by the end of the day. Free lattes for nurses, notes left for baristas. Somebody bought coffee for a construction crew. Someone else bought pastries for a group of seniors. A whole community spun out of one person's single quiet moment of generosity. And then there was Texas, where 2 rival high school football teams, still sore from a tense game the week before, teamed up to clean a park that had been hit by a storm. A parent filmed it. Kids in opposing jerseys hauling branches together. Teens who, a few days earlier were yelling at each other across the field, now working like they'd known each other their whole lives. The video went viral not because it was dramatic, but because it was pure. It looked like what we want the country to be. One of my favorite stories came out of Chicago. A single mother facing eviction, she put up a simple post asking if anyone had advice for staying afloat. Her neighbors responded with groceries. Someone babysat for her so she could take extra shifts. Someone else offered to help her apply for rental aid. And when the story hit social media, a GoFundMe was created, shared, and within 24 hours, her rent was paid. Not because she was famous, not because a politician or a celebrity retweeted it, just because people who will never meet her decided the story mattered. In Virginia, a group of Vietnam veterans, men who know something about pain and healing, showed up at a homeless shelter with handmade blankets. They sat with the folks who needed warmth and listened to their stories. One vet said, "Kindness isn't a weakness. It's the armor we all need." I like that line. It stuck with me. The idea that empathy doesn't reduce us, it strengthens us. And right here in Pennsylvania, students, actual teenagers who supposedly spend all their time doom scrolling, logged in more than 350 acts of kindness in one day. They created compliment jars in hallways. They cleaned up parks. They checked on new students. One teen wrote online, "In a world of noise, kindness is the quiet revolution." Out of the mouths of Gen Z. This year, kindness didn't feel performative. It didn't feel like a PR campaign. It felt like a country exhaling, a pause button on a year that really hasn't given us many. Psychologists like Abigail Marsh say kindness is a muscle, something you build, something that gets easier the more you use it. It lowers stress, it strengthens relationships, it creates a sense of belonging. And after a stretch of political and economic anxiety, people were ready for something simple and healing. Even NPR's Goats and Soda covered a story about a doctor who had an aha moment after watching workers embrace during a disaster response. He realized that all his technical training mattered less than how he made people feel safe. And that's what kindness does. It makes people feel like they're not alone. And the impact was real. Volunteer signups jumped 15% nationwide after World Kindness Day. Organizations reported that people kept participating through World Kindness Week, I guess, because once you start something good, sometimes it's hard to stop. It feels good to feel good. Mark Twain once wrote, "Kindness is a language which the deaf can hear and the blind can see." And maybe that's why this whole thing resonated, because it cuts through the noise. It goes straight to our shared humanity. Kindness isn't naive. It isn't soft. It's not some optional extra when everything else is calm and easy. It's a choice, especially when the world feels divided. And the thing about choices is that they ripple. One note on a classroom wall, one anonymous coffee donation, a pile of handmade blankets, one community lifting up a single mom, one teenager leaving a compliment in a hallway. None of these things change the world all by themselves, but together, they remind us of the world we want. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, what can I do? Here's the answer. Something small, something sincere, something simple. A thank you note, a phone call to someone you miss, a compliment to a stranger, holding the door, checking in on a neighbor, leaving a $5 gift card secretly for someone at work. Kindness isn't grand. It just needs to be consistent. So as you head into the rest of your week, here's the challenge. Pick one act of kindness, just one, and do it. You never know who needs it, and you never know how far it might go. Because small sparks, they create big waves. And this year, we saw just how powerful those waves can be. All right. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to listen to this episode. My sincere thanks to all of you, and my sincere wish that you reach out and communicate with the podcast. I would love to hear from you in any way. Compliments, critiques, questions, suggestions, whatever. You can do so by using any of the social media platforms that the podcast uses. The links to all of those are on the Linktree page, and the address to the podcast Linktree page is in the episode description. We'll be back on Friday with another supplemental Back Porch Files. And until then, all I ask is that you stay vigilant, stay kind, and have the week you'd wish for others.